A pretty potent storm is coming to New England. This is going to be a multi-hazard storm with heavy rain, strong winds near the coast, and a continuously increasing threat for snow across portions of New England. So these are the three main threats. There is also a coastal flood threat that is a bit lesser than the main three threats. So we'll start with the rain threat. Rainfall has been trending up throughout Saturday. The total rain expected. Most of New England is going to see at least an inch of rain, and many areas are going to see more than that, with 2 to 3 inches in some places, and there will very likely be isolated amounts that are higher than that, up to 4 inches of rain. This could cause some minor river flooding. At last check, there are a handful of rivers that are forecast to reach minor flood stage at this time in New England. There are 2 rivers that are forecast to hit moderate flood stage at this time. That is the Hoosick River near Williamstown, Massachusetts, and the Kennebec River in Hallowell, Maine. Both these rivers currently forecast to reach moderate flood stage. There are a small handful of rivers forecast to reach minor flood stage at this time. The main flooding concern will be from poor drainage and ponding of roadways. There is a threat for flash flooding as well. The Weather Prediction Center does have a portion of New England in the slight category for excessive rainfall that would indicate the potential for scattered flash floods. The rainfall rates that could occur with this storm are very high for this time of year. I know throughout this past summer we saw a lot of heavy rain events throughout the summer, but once you get into the winter months, uh, the atmosphere typically isn't as primed for these heavy rainfall storms, but that is what we are going to get. This is going to be a very moisture rich atmosphere, again, by winter standards. And on that note, some parts of New England, especially northern New England, the ground is frozen. So when you have all that water going onto a frozen ground, it can't get absorbed into the ground as easily. And on top of that, from last week's storm, there is still snow on the ground that will be melting while the rain is coming down. That will help to fill up some of the rivers and streams. So moving on to the wind threat. The wind threat is, as I wrote in my forecast post, there's a lot of factors working for strong winds, but there's also some factors working to limit the winds. So the winds are kind of a wild card. The strongest winds have trended further east or further offshore, really, of most of New England. So the strong wind threat will be likely be limited right toward the coast, with the exception of once you get into eastern Maine, that's where the wind threat could push a little further inland. Eastern Maine will likely see the highest of wind gusts, where they were most likely to see gusts of 60 plus miles per hour. But again, the wind is really becoming a bit of a wild card with just how strong it can get with these factors working for it and these factors working against it. We'll just have to wait and see, which of those factors ends up winning out the battle. As far as snow goes, this has really increased over the past couple days as the track of the storm has trended further east. And the further east it tracks, the colder the air will be on the backside, and the further the snowfield can expand. Yesterday, it was looking like the snow would really be limited to just Vermont, and Vermont's still in it. Vermont will be looking at several inches of snow. This will be a highly elevation dependent snow. But now it's looking like potentially northern New Hampshire and northern Maine could get in on the snow as well, and maybe even the Berkshires to an extent could see a couple inches of snow as well on the backside. But yes, several inches of snow. This will be a wet, heavy snow that will weigh down the branches and the power lines, and concerns about power outages across Vermont from the heavy, wet snow is certainly increasing, and that threat is starting to eclipse the threat of power outages along the coast from the wind. So, those are the three main threats from this storm, the latest trends on how they are trending. The one lesser threat is coastal flooding. Now, there is a coastal flood watch out in effect for Rhode Island. Narragansett Bay will likely see the worst of this, but the worst of it shouldn't be too bad. There could be potentially moderate coastal flooding in that area. It is more likely to stay minor coastal flooding. Some splashover will be possible across most of New England's coast and even into Maine, where the flow will be a strong flow onshore. The max surge is expected to come a few hours after high tide. And on top of that, the high tide right now is not astronomically high. So coastal flooding isn't an overly big concern, but we'll still have to keep it in the back of our minds as we watch the rain, wind, and snow play out during this storm.